Hey folks, welcome to Bad GM's Campaign Build Along. I'm the Bad GM Wayne Davis, and this is the show where we build an entire campaign for you, and we do it from scratch. This season, we're building a campaign for the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, so if you're a fan of D&D, or really a fan of any fantasy tabletop game, we've got you covered. Now, before we get into this week's build, I have a couple of pieces of business I need to take care of. First thing I wanted to mention is that I've got an announcement concerning the future of both of Bad GM Productions podcasts, and I'm going to hold off making that full announcement until the end of today's show. I will say this, we're not going away, so don't sweat that. Believe me, if we were going to do that, I wouldn't have started building a new campaign. We've got some changes coming, and I'll address that when we're done with today's build. The second thing I wanted to mention is I'm making a format change this season from past seasons of the show. We are not going to be doing a build recap. And for those of you who haven't joined us for the first 2 seasons of the show, I used to begin each episode by recapping what we built the previous week. I've decided to skip that this season because, quite frankly, I decided it wasn't really needed. It just took up way too much time, and if you're listening to the podcast to play the game, you've been following the shows in order anyway, so you know what's going on. Plus, I'm taking a lot of time to teach as I go along this season, so I don't need to waste time at the start of every episode to recap the stuff you already know from the previous week. So that brings the business to a close, which means we can get down to building new stuff this week, right? Well, not quite. I've got some stuff I caught when I was editing last week's show that I need to clean up, so let's clean that up before we get to the new stuff. First thing I needed to point out was the reason Bree only gave the group 50 feet of rope is that each member of the group should have also had rope because their starting gear should have come with rope. So combined, they should have had at least 200 feet of rope. If I was incorrect in that assumption, then she would have given them at least 200 feet of rope. Make that adjustment if it's necessary. The next note I made concerned the volcano size. I said when I was detailing the size of the volcano that the size of it wasn't mission critical. I realized later how stupid that comment was when I noted that it was 150 feet to 160 feet from the lip of the cauldron down to the bottom. So, when you're working out what this looks like, you might want to take that into consideration because obviously this is mission critical. I had someone ask me about fall damage on the climb up the volcano, and I told them, so I'll mention it here. If you feel like being nice to your group, especially since they're first level, you can choose to not roll dice at any point on the fall damage and just make the damage 1 point for each 10 feet. That way it's not catastrophic, but it is an attention getter. Obviously, at some point, you're going to have to take the training wheels off, but for the first time, I can certainly understand doing it this way. Last one. What did I mean by the double test when I mentioned the metal and jewels in room 1? Obviously, the traps were one test. There is a second test, but that's not something we're getting into just yet, so just shove that off to the side. We're going to leave it there for now. All right, so now I'm done with the old business, which means we can finally get to the new business and actually build new stuff. That means you need to grab dungeon map number 2. So if you still have it from last week, pull it up front and center. And if you don't, pause the show for a minute and grab it off the website, badgmproductions.net. Once you've got that puppy in hand, we will pick up at the bottom of the stairs, which is roughly where we left off last week. I mean, we were at the top of these stairs, but who's quibbling about where we are on the stairs, right? So let's start the flavor text, as it were. Your torchlight illuminates the stairs as you reach the bottom of the stairwell. As you do, you note that the hallway you enter turns to the right, and you also notice a faint light coming from the next room. The 10-foot wide hallway you're standing in empties into that room. All right, the group is going to be cautious, most likely, especially since there's some light coming from here. Now, we're going to mess with them a little bit here, as the light, which was faint from the hallway, can be seen brightly about 30 feet from the entryway. That being said, it seems to be moving away from them, and it gets fainter the further it moves away. But there seems to be a bright light that gets stronger the closer it gets, though it never gets closer than 30 feet. You need to play this game with them a little bit and try to play keep away with them. There are 2 giant fire beetles in here, and the stats for them are on page 325 of the Monster Manual. If the group chooses to engage, roll initiative and have the combat. This is going to be an exceptionally easy combat, and if you're tempted and or want to, especially if you have a larger group, feel free to put 1 or 2 more in here. When this is over, continue. The fire beetles dealt with, you notice what they were protecting, a pile of coins. As you go to pick them up, you find a vial beneath them. It's marked with a strange marking that you do not recognize, and the odd colored liquid inside it both fascinates and confuses you. You also notice what appear to be old, partially gnawed bones scattered around the room. Not enough to form an entire body, but enough to make you curious. The coins are silver pieces, and there are 50 of them. The vial is a potion, and since the group will have no idea what it is unless they're silly enough to just drink it, we're not going to say what it is here just yet. Let's move along. Now, and you know what? Actually, we're going to do the fire beetle thing in each of the next 3 sections, though we're reducing the number by 1 until there's only 1 left in the final smallest section. There would be a small pile of coins in each of those rooms as well, and we'll alternate between copper and silver with 2 piles of copper and a pile of silver. The 2 copper piles have 20 and 15 in them respectively, while the silver has 15 in it. Each also has a potion vial in it, and we'll get to that later on. Once we're done with that, we'll pick up the commentary. Having dealt with the nuisances that were fire beetles, you find yourself at the end of the hallway, staring at a dead end. You find yourself turning around, checking back from where you came for doors. Surely this can't be the end of the line. Now, there are multiple ways we can play this for finding our secret door. If the group is stumped on how to get through here, you can have them make an active wisdom perception check with a DC of 14 to find the door. That being said, when the group reaches the end of the hall and reach a dead end, it's probably going to occur to them that there should be a door here somewhere. So that's not going to be an active check. That's a regular check. So they need to make an actual wisdom perception check, DC 14. We're going to be nice about finding the mechanism on this door. It's going to be a small inlaid handle about midway down the right-hand side. Once they realize it's there, they can reach in, grab the handle, and pull. And with that, we'll continue our monologue into room 2. You hear the whoosh of air as the stone door pushes open. Entering the room, you're surprised as the torches in this room light on their own, which automatically puts you on guard. Glancing around the room, it's apparent that this was, at one time, some sort of a treasure room, though it's apparent that the majority of the riches were taken at one time, as half a dozen large treasure chests stand open and empty, save a few scattered coins. One major article of treasure, however, was left behind, and one would guess it was because of its size. A full suit of plate armor, still standing on its armor stand, posted in the northeast corner of the room, shining like the day it was made. Now, for the record, the group can gather about 20 gold pieces worth of coinage from the floor if they so choose. The suit of armor, however, is not what they think it is. It's actually what's known as animated armor and will attack the first member of the group to get close enough to put their hands on it. And it will attack until it runs out of hit points, at which point it will fall into a heap of useless metal. For the record, if the group really wants to gather a stack of useless plate, they can certainly do so, but I'd point out to them that carrying that much plate is going to make them very loud, so they won't have a chance of sneaking up on anything down here. Just saying. As we can see on the map, the only door is to the north, so let's head into that short hallway and make our way into room 3. We will continue with the flavor text. As you enter the room, torches on the northern wall come to light on their own. They illuminate nothing. You notice a door to your immediate left as well as a door to the south. Other than that, this room appears to be empty, though there are what appear to be remnants of chairs and maybe a table or two in here, but you cannot be certain. So what this room may have been used for in the past isn't certain. The primary use for this room is a resting place for the group. They've had a few combats since they got in here, so an opportunity to take a short rest, if necessary, may not be a bad idea. However, if everything's good, they've got a chance to move on. If you're looking at the map, this is also the room with the secret door, and we'll use the same checks we used for the secret door to room 2, so look back to the checks for that room. And we're going to build the rooms out in order here, so we'll move on to room 4. The door to this room has no lock on it, and the handle appears to have been damaged long ago. In fact, it appears that it hasn't been used in a very long time. This is confirmed by the dust on the floor, which matches the thickness of the dust you noticed on the floor in the rest of the room when you entered. There's a mess of broken crates in here, covered in dust, soot, and decades worth of cobwebs. It's obvious this room needs a thorough cleaning. This is an old storage closet of some type. If the group decides to do a bit of searching, we'll do them a solid and toss them a bone. They'll find 3 vials of a light gold liquid labeled with a script they cannot read. Well, not entirely anyway. If they got an elf in the group, they can try to make an intelligence history check with a DC of 19. If they make it, they'll figure out it's a potion of healing. Otherwise, they just know they've got 3 potions. You know they're potions of healing, and they work like so. When they're taken, the person taking the potion regains 2d4 plus 2 hit points. By the way, we'll just go ahead and say that these are the same as the potions that they've picked up previously. That saves us the trouble. Now, unless they identify the potion, they have no idea what they're taking, so they probably shouldn't be taking some potion willy-nilly. So, yeah. Oh, and obviously, if they don't check the closet, they don't get the potions, and we just move on to room 5. Oh, yeah, and before we get into the flavor text for room 5, I really need to set this up. The room itself is the actual encounter. I mentioned when we built it that it's basically a 5-foot wide walkway and that it wasn't going to have walls per se, and it doesn't. We're setting it up as an old school rope bridge. Yeah, rope bridge with a wooden plank walkway. And since this bad boy is who knows how many years old, these wooden planks are not in the best of shape. So we are definitely going to mess with the group as we go through the narrative. We're also going to toss in a little something extra to really ratchet up the heat as well, and we're going to get to that in a bit. As you open the door, to your shock, you realize this is not a room, but rather a bridge. And not just a bridge, but a rope bridge, much like a bridge children would play on. Only this one appears to be crossing from this doorway to... well, you're not exactly sure how far it goes, but since it seems to be going straight for a long way, it must be going somewhere. When the group starts across, make sure you know the group order since it will be coming into play in a bit. Now, back to the flavor. As you take your first steps, you hear the creaking of the ancient wood under your feet. For a moment, you question whether or not it will actually hold your weight, and you hesitate. After a moment, you settle your full weight on it, and to your relief, it holds. Step after step, you continue to hear the creaking, and those are replaced by the occasional cracking of a board or two, though they continue to hold. What really draws your attention is when halfway through your trip, a strong breeze begins to whip up from below you. You manage to grab hold of the ropes to continue to hold yourself in place, and after a moment or two, it dies down enough that you can continue your trip across the bridge. This is where we put our surprise into place. Whomever the last 2 characters in the line are need to make either strength athletics or dexterity acrobatics checks. The second to last has a DC of 13, and the one at the back of the line has a DC at 15. We have flavor text specifically for them on this one. As your group mates continue across the bridge, the wind picks up again, but this time you can't grab the ropes fast enough and you feel yourself being caught up in the wind. You're doing everything you can to grab a hold of something, anything, to avoid going over the edge and down into the endless nothing below. So long as they make the check, all's good. You can work it out however you want. They can just snag the rope or a board or whatever. You can also allow, if you'd like, one of the other players to try a Hail Mary dexterity acrobatics check to grab one of them, though I'd set the DC at 15 as well. If you have a spellcaster of some type, they could certainly try something if they've got a spell that might work, so you can give them a quick moment to check their prepared spells, but I mean a quick moment. If all else fails and it looks like you're going to lose a group member, I'd also allow your group to put their heads together and come up with any creative solution that they could reasonably come up with in about 60 to 90 seconds. So they could MacGyver something in that amount of time that you think these kids could reasonably come up. If you think they could do it, why not? Let them try it. It's up to you. While you've averted disaster, you do realize you're going to have to find another way out, as that final gust took out the bridge, leaving a 50-foot gap of nothingness between you and the way you came in. However, since you can't do anything about it now, you realize you might as well move forward. Continuing along, you finally make your way through an opening into a very well-lit room with statues of lions in all four corners. The light appears to be coming from the eyes of those statues, and there's a pedestal in the center of the room that is currently empty, and its former use isn't apparent. There's a door on the northern wall. All right, so this is room 6. Those lights are fairly bright, so it's hard to tell what they're coming from, but I'll tell you, just in case the group decides they want to check it out. There's a permanent light spell cast on gems that have been socketed into the eyes of the statues. They can try to pry the gems out, but if they try to do it, they can't. There's a reason for it, but they won't be able to figure it out. Between you and me, we're just going to call it magic and move on. Oh, and the door is neither trapped nor locked, but they're going to probably check for both. Just use the checks we've laid out thus far, and you can either choose to mess with them or not. Though with everything they just went through, I'd probably toss them a bone here and just not mess with them. Opening the door, you realize you'll be heading down yet another corridor, though this time you know you'll be able to walk side by side. And fortunately, the floor is made of stone, and there are walls and a ceiling. There isn't any light, however, so you'll need to keep your torches. Much as it's been in the rest of this complex, your footsteps echo off the floor to make the only noise you hear, though after everything you've been through to this point, it's actually becoming a bit of a comfort rather than the worrying sound it was when you first entered. It doesn't take you long to reach the end of the hallway, and you make your way into another well-lit room. This room is larger than the last, and it has 4 more lion statues, and the light also appears to be coming from their eyes. There are 2 pedestals in the center of this room, and again, whatever they were used for is no longer apparent. There's a door to this room, and it's on the eastern wall. Checking your map, this is room 7, and we're heading for the largest room on your map, which is room 8. This is going to be the equivalent of the boss fight in a video game, so I would suggest this is a good pause spot during gameplay for a bathroom break, refill the beverages, get your snacks, stretch your legs, etc. And this is also where a number of DMs, myself included, struggle when it comes to figuring out how to work out these final encounters. With a low-level party, it's really hard to stick one monster or NPC in there and have it be a high enough challenge level to really be a challenge to the party without risking killing one, if not all of them. However, you also have to be aware when you choose less powerful challenge rating monsters or NPCs, because if you make it too cheesy, you risk taking away from the seriousness of the situation or making it too easy on the group. There also needs to be a certain amount of logic to placing the monsters and NPCs in your dungeons and in other locales. I mean, you can flip through the monster manual and toss anything in any particular place you want for any reason, but if the group feels like you're just tossing things in randomly, they're eventually going to feel disconnected from the story. So, in order to keep them engaged with what you're building, there needs to be a coherent story, and the creatures they run into need to fit within that. So what we're going to do is have our group run into some cultists when they go through that doorway. Their stats can be found on page 345 of the Monster Manual, and as you can see, they're a 1/8 challenge rating. So we can throw a decent amount of them at the group without overwhelming them, in theory. And I have a way to have them be here that will fit the story we're telling here, so don't sweat the details. For the purposes of the combat, we're going to have 6 down here for a 5-person party. But if you're going with more or less than 5, just have it be 1 more than the total number of party members. Now, that being said, if you don't have any fighters in the party, feel free to adjust that to either an even number or 1 less than the total number of party members, since having no fighters will make it more difficult for the group to take them down, and we don't want to see the group lose any members. We just want to challenge them a bit more than we have to this point. All right, So with the break over with, let's get back to the narrative. As you get close enough to the door to open it, you hear faint noises coming from the other side. You can't quite make out what it is, but from what you can make out, you think it's possibly singing or chanting of some type. So here's what I hate about 5th edition D&D that I loved about 3rd edition. There is no listen check. I loved having a listen check. What we'll do in this case is use the wisdom perception at a DC of 15 to allow someone to get a better sense of what's going on behind that door. A success would allow them to better make out what's going on, and they can tell you that it is chanting, though the language isn't familiar to them. The door isn't locked and it isn't trapped, though by this point the group's probably checking these things, so you know the drill. I already gave you the 411 on what they're going to run into from an NPC standpoint, so let's just move on to the flavor text for room 8. You weren't quite sure what to expect when you entered the room, but you certainly weren't expecting this. 4 huge lion statues in each corner of the room, shining light from their eyes down towards the large pedestal in the center, around which 6 cloaked figures are kneeling and chanting. Spread out around the room are a number of chests with various sticks of some sort of burning material, or at least some sort of smoking material, since there's smoke coming from them. There are also at least another half dozen bowls around the room with small flames coming from them, and you can't quite make out what's in them. You have just enough time to take all of this in when it becomes apparent your presence has been noted as one of the chanting figures rises, pulls back their hoods, and looks your way. You have interrupted our sacred ceremony. This cannot go unpunished. They're not in the mood for discussion. Roll for initiative and run the combat. They'll fight to the death, and the group can loot them when they're done. For the record, the chests all hold various incenses and oils, though none of them really have value, though they could take them to Bree if they so chose. The bowls with the flame are burning. Well, let's just say we know where some of the blood from upstairs went to ultimately. What the group's going to be interested in is what's on the pedestal. It's a couple of stone tablets. The inscriptions on them are in the same script that was on the entry door to the complex, but they also seem to be glowing a bit, though the glow fades as the group looks at them. They could pick them up to take them out, and of course they could see the door to the east. Oh, and insofar as how these guys got down here, well, stay tuned. We're getting to that. You realize you've really only got one way out at this point, and it's through the doorway to the east. Heading that way, you've got another rope bridge, but fortunately for you, this one is only 25 feet long, and you can see the next room across the way. You quickly make your way across, and as you enter the room, you realize you're chasing a torch that's getting away from you. And room 9 is going to be the final surprise we've got for them down here, and a bit of an explanation as to what's happened, as well as a setup. And just as you make the turn with your own torches, you see a largest man clad all in black and holding a tablet double the size of the 2 you've got, step into what appears to be a black hole in the floor in the middle of the room and disappear. When you get to where the hole is, it's gone, and the rest of the room is empty. Don't worry about the man in black. He's a quasi-MacGuffin, though I do intend to flesh him out for use later on. For the moment, I'm using him as the excuse to get our cultists down here as well as some of our creatures from last week's build. He was the one testing our group. I really just didn't want to keep him around long enough to speak to the group, because I know if you give the group a chance, they're going to try to attack him. And if your group tried, he still went through the portal no matter what. At this point, they need the wisdom perception check DC 13 to find the secret door that's going to get them back into room 3, and then that's going to allow them to get back out. Now, before we head back to the surface, there's a question I'm sure that's going to come up. What happens if the group finds that secret door earlier? Do they have a chance to find our special man in black? Short answer, sure. He's going to be in room 8 with the cultists. However, the cultists will still be the ones to attack the group. But to get ourselves out of this predicament, we're going to take a few liberties. He will already have the large tablet under his arm when they arrive. He will go first in initiative when the fighting starts. His move will be to go invisible, and therefore he'll run, which means the group will have no idea what happened to him. What about the portal? Well, we could nerf this a little bit. We'll argue he opens and closes this on his own, since they won't know the difference. If they go this way, they won't know about the portal, unless, of course, they listen to this show, but Then again, if they're working off information they got from the show, that would be metagaming, and we don't like metagamers, do we? All of that being said, if these solutions don't work, you could always move the portal to room 7 and just have him go that way instead. That makes it easier than having to nerf it. You could then set up room 9 as some sort of Knights of the Round Table sort of room and toss in some meaningless stuff in there for the kids to look at. I mean, that would work as well. All right, so then we can just assume the group's made their way back out through the complex and has gotten out the doors and back to the point where they need to climb out. After all the exploring you've done and all the time you spent underground, you emerge back into the volcano and you realize it's gotten late. Not quite dark, but late enough in the day that you need to get a move on unless you want to be making your way down the worst part of this thing in the pitch black. So it's time to get moving, and you realize you're a bit heavier than you were when you started all of this earlier today. And they really just need to reverse the process from earlier today. Also, unless they undid their ropes, they should still be in place, which means they just need to make the rolls to get back up. Now, if they did undo their ropes, they've got a new set of issues. That means they've got to find a spot to try to get a rope back up into place to get one person up to the rim to get it secured enough for somebody to climb. And the checks depend on whether they're doing the 20 feet up to a rock, then 30 feet up to the rim, or climbing a few rocks up, then the 40-foot climb up to the rim. The check to throw to the rim is a Strength Athletics check DC 16. The climb is Strength Athletics or Dexterity Acrobatics DC 12. And you have to make one of those for every 10 feet. And remember that failing one equals falling, and you take 1 point of damage for every 10 feet you fall. Anyway, once they reach the top, it's basically the reverse of the climb up. Though I'd argue it's going to be a bit easier, so we'll make the Strength Athletics or Dexterity Acrobatics checks for those first 50 feet a lot easier at DC 13. Once those 5 are done, there are no more checks, and they can make their way the rest of the way down without incidents. We'll do one more bit of flavor text here. Having finished your descent, you are met by Bree and several other members of the community who welcome you with cheers, open arms, and most importantly, food and drink. Bree nods her head in approval, and the group leads you back for dinner, which they tell you they've been holding for you so they can hear the tales of your adventure. And they expect to hear a grand tale. And this is where we'll end the build for this week. We'll pick up here next week and see what those tablets tell us about Bree's vision and what this means for the group. All right. So I said at the top of the show that I have an announcement about the future of the podcasts. I've had some personal and professional changes happen, and because of those, I've had to make some changes in how the podcasts are going to go moving forward. Like I said, I'm not canceling either one of them because I love doing them too much. That being said, I can't keep doing 2 podcasts a week because with the job change I've got going on, along with a lot of life changes, I just won't have the time for a while to do 2 in a week. So here's what we're going to do. Starting the week of March 18th, we're going to alternate the podcasts each week. And we're going to change the day podcasts drop from Fridays to Sundays. This is going to give me the time I need to get shows written up and produced. In the case of this show, that means episodes will be going much longer than a half an hour, since I know you're going to only be getting 2 shows a month. So I need to be putting in as much stuff as I can in the time that I've got. So here's how it's going to work. So the first time that this is going to go down is going to be the week of the 18th. That means that that particular episode is going to actually debut on the 24th. And that is going to actually be a role-playing history episode. So that means that after next Friday, the 15th, you won't get another episode of Bad GM's Campaign Build Along until the 31st. What I'm hoping that you're going to do in the meanwhile, if this is the only podcast you listen to, I'm really hoping you'll pick up Role-Playing History because it's really a cool show. I'm hoping. And then I'm trying to hopefully get people who only listen to Role-Playing History to listen to this. That's my hope. My hope is that you're going to just stay with me as we make all these changes. I promise you, it's going to be for the better in the long run. It's going to keep me healthy. It's going to keep me happy. It's going to keep me churning these things out. But anyway, like I said, we've still got another week under the current format. I'm not going to get all sappy about it. I'm going to get my butt back to work, and I'm going to keep this going. The theme music for Bad GM's Campaign Build Along is Savage by Alex-Productions on sound.eu. Check out the info box for this episode for the full credit. Bad GM's Campaign Build Along is a production of Bad GM Productions. You know the drill by now, so check us out on social media so you can keep up with all the changes we're making. Next week, we find out if Bree really knows what she's talking about or if she's really lost her little mind. Until then, I'm the Bad GM, Wayne Davis. I'll see you at the game table.